But rather than accept the attenuated view of human nature, which is assumed by economists, rather than assume that our neighbors are all merely, in John Ruskin's terms, covetous machines, believers are called to display what human life is meant to be, how human nature can only be fulfilled and human happiness only achieved when the reality of love that is at the core of our image-bearing being is honored. Rather than trying to win the world by being more like the world, Eugene Peterson has observed that it is the task of the Christian community to give witness and guidance in the living of life in a culture that is relentless in reducing, constricting, and enervating life. Now, one last somewhat practical comment about that. How might we do that? Well, that witness and guidance can be given in very simple ways and often in patterns of everyday practice. And I want to close with a story that I heard Eugene Peterson tell several years ago about how he as a pastor encouraged his congregation to avoid the modern tyranny of addiction to speed and efficiency, both of which were dehumanizing, both addictions which are encouraged by modern economic structures. We were at a conference on technology and the church, and we had been talking about the temptation to emulate our machines, to live without patience, to live without openness to wonder, to live without being attentive. And Peterson commented that he thought one of the most important lessons he ever tried to teach his congregation was to take time to worship. So much of our lives, he said, is relentlessly governed by the clock, by demands of efficiency, but surely we shouldn't try to worship God efficiently. So Peterson decided to slow down his worship service. And when it was time for him to offer a pastoral prayer, instead of jogging to the pulpit as if he was in a hurry to get it over with, he sat in his chair for several seconds, and then he calmly walked to the pulpit, and he paused, and then he said, "Let us pray," and then he paused again. Instead of jumping right into the prayer, he allowed some time for his congregation to collect themselves, to quiet their restless hearts and minds, and focus their attentiveness on being present to God. Sometimes 10 or 20 seconds of silence would pass. The first time I did it, he said, some people thought I'd had a heart attack. But I thought, he said, it was important to teach them to take time to worship. And then, as he was telling the story, he paused and he remarked, it took about 10 years to get the point across. I love that story. It's a great example of a countercultural convention that reorients our experience in space and time in order to reorient our desires, our expectations, our disposition, our affections. And that, I think, in turn would have consequences in how people ordered their lives in space and time Monday through Saturday. Peterson's strategy wasn't designed simply to teach his congregation a different style of worship. He intended through that way of ordering worship to bring them to a recognition of something deficient, something disordered in their everyday lives. By making the worship service less like a commercial television program, he was able, over the course of time, to reorient his congregation's experience so that they were, among other things, more likely to perceive the disordering effects of that frenetic, restless, clock-driven life sustained by television as well as other cultural institutions. Acquiring the ability, the taste, to take time to worship isn't learning a doctrine as such. And as such, many pastors would be puzzled to consider such a strategy as part of their job description. But Peterson was promoting a practice and a disposition that were, in Paul's terms, in accord with sound doctrine. Having learned how to be attentive to this moment before God, rather than rushing on to the next, they had been equipped to learn many other things, doctrinal and practical. And it only took 10 years.
This has been a presentation of the Richmond Center for Christian Study. If you would like to obtain more information about the Study Center, or if you would like to support the Center, please visit us on the web at richmondstudycenter.org. We trust that this and future presentations of the Study Center will be used of God to bring gospel transformation to every area of your life and to the culture we live in.